Okay, so now we've gone into the NIH guide for grants and contracts, and we found a program announcement that looks promising: the community interventions to address the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic among health disparity and vulnerable populations. So let's click on it and see what it looks like. Okay, so first we see that it's from Department of Health and Human Services, obviously, and this tells you which institutes are participating in it. So we know NIH overall, but then there are all these different institutes within NIH. So there's National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, which is kind of obvious because they were talking about priority populations, but there are some other ones too, like National Eye Institute, National Institute on Aging, alcohol abuse and alcoholism, child health and human development. What are some other ones that we usually look at? Drug abuse, mental health, environmental health sciences. So these are some of the different institutes that are interested in funding a grant here. It doesn't mean they will, it says that it means they're interested in funding one and they might have some money. So here's the title, and this says what type of grant it is. So it's an R01. So if you're a brand new grad student, you won't be applying for this. But if you're a faculty member and maybe you have some smaller grants under your belt and you're ready to take on a big grant, like a 5-year grant with $500,000 per year, then this is one for you. And announcement type new, that means it's not a renewal of an old one, because obviously, if it's COVID, this topic hasn't been around for long, but it could have been like a recycle of an old program announcement, but this one isn't. Related notices, none, says that you don't have to click on anything else to see like what might be related to it. Now, this is the FOA number, and because it's a PAR, that means that it's kind of a general announcement, and they're going to fund several different rounds of this grant. So this means this is just telling you that it's something that NIH is interested in. It's not saying we have a certain amount of money set aside. If it was an RFA, that would say we have a certain amount of money set aside and we want to fund this many grants or something. So this is just like saying NIH is interested in this. Okay, so then we can scroll down. There's no companion funding opportunities. What's the purpose? It gives you a little blurb about the purpose. So applications to implement and evaluate community interventions testing either the impacts of mitigation strategies to prevent COVID-19 transmission in health disparity populations and other vulnerable groups, or already implemented new or adapted interventions to address the adverse psychosocial, behavioral, or socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic on the health of these groups. So this is pretty broad. This is interventions or just studying the effects of the pandemic. When was it posted? It was posted in June. So that means people saw this on June 17th and started working on it. And the earliest they could submit it is July 28th, 2020. Okay, so most people will not submit it that early unless they were already working on something because they knew this was coming out. But this is the earliest they can submit. But really the due date is down here. There are 2 different due dates. One is August 28th. So if you hurry up and get your act together and submit by August 28th, that's great. If not, if you can't make August, then there's another date in December 1st, 2020. And this one's interesting because there are only 2 reviews. It doesn't, some of these go on like 3 times a year for years and years, but this is a short-term thing. Okay, AIDS applications due date. They're not making a special opportunity for AIDS grants because this isn't really about AIDS, so don't worry about that. This also tells you when they're going to review it. So if you submit it in August, it would get reviewed in November. And if you submit it in December, it would get reviewed in March. And then council has to meet. So first the reviewers meet here in these review dates, and then the people at NIH bring the best grants up to council. So that would be January and May. And the earliest start date would be like next April, next July. So that's kind of interesting because we don't even know what's going to be happening with COVID then. We hope it'll be gone, but we don't really know. But you can't start your grant until April or July of 2021. So that'll be interesting. And that it kind of makes sense why this expires December 2nd, because hopefully by the time these grants are actually going, we'll have COVID under control. Let's hope. Okay, so now they give you all these instructions and table of contents. This thing is a link to apply using Assist. Now, you as an applicant don't have to do this. This is what your grants person at USC will do, someone like Consuelo or Jean. So you don't have to worry about actually uploading the stuff. In fact, you can't because your ID doesn't give you access to that. So don't worry about that. Okay, but this tells you all the information. So that here's funding opportunity description is more information about what they want to fund. So they're giving you definitions like what's a health disparity population? It's racial and ethnic minorities, socioeconomically disadvantaged populations, underserved rural, sexual and gender minorities. So these are the people who you'd have to be serving or studying to qualify for this. And they've also added COVID vulnerable populations. So also older adults, people living in chronic care facilities. So if you're studying any of these groups, then you're eligible. And when they talk about multi-level interventions, they're giving you the definition because you might not know what that is. That's like an intervention that works at several levels, like maybe it's at the individual level and the policy level or something. So if they tell you it has to be multi-level, make sure you're really making it multi-level. Okay, background. So they give you a little background so you know what they're looking for. Research objectives. Here's their key questions. To what extent do existing interventions slow the spread of COVID? To what extent do policies, guidelines, and other interventions facilitate adherence and mitigate the multifaceted impacts of COVID? So look at these and make sure that your idea fits in here, because if your idea doesn't fit in here, there's no point in applying. Then they're not going to fund it. Okay, so they're saying what kind of studies you can do. You could look at natural experiments. You can do prospective interventions. Okay, so if you want to do an intervention, you can start one and evaluate it. They're telling you what kind of strategies you might want to look at, mitigation strategies. They're giving you a lot of details about what they want to fund. Okay, and they're also giving you some hints, like for data harmonization, you should probably use established measures like the Phoenix Toolkit. There's also a trans NIH working group that's making COVID measures available, so you should use those. Don't make up your own measures. Go to this toolkit and find measures that are already being used. And they're also telling you what's not responsive to the FOA. So if you're doing this, don't submit here. If it doesn't have a focus on one of the disparity populations or a COVID vulnerable population, if it doesn't test intervention effects on behavioral and health outcomes, if it's testing interventions outside the US, or if it's only qualitative, if you're doing a bunch of focus groups that are all qualitative, don't apply for this because they're not going to fund it. Okay. Then some of this is pretty much boilerplate. They're saying, yeah, it's a grant, so it's not, a cooperative agreement or something. You can apply and reapply. It can be a clinical trial, so you can be randomizing subjects to interventions if you want. They don't know how many they're going to fund. They don't know how much money NIH is going to give to them right now. So they're saying it's contingent upon NIH appropriations. And they could fund nothing. If they think all the applications submitted are bad, they don't have to fund anybody. So it's contingent on the submission of a sufficient number of meritorious applications. Now, in reality, they'll probably get way more meritorious applications than they can fund, so they're not worried about that. But if they get a whole bunch of applications and they're all bad, they can just keep the money and save it for something else. They don't have to give the money away. Okay, your budgets are limited to $500,000 in direct costs, and we'll talk about direct costs more later, annually. So you could get a 5-year project. Here's the scope, the 5-year project with $500,000 a year. And that sounds like a lot of money, but it actually kind of goes fast. So don't get carried away in what you can do. Make sure that you're always thinking of the budget and thinking of what you can fund. Then a lot of this is boilerplate, who's eligible to apply. You have to apply as an organization, like a college or a nonprofit, a local government. You can't just like apply as a person and say, give me $500,000 a year and I'm going to do something. You have to be like an organization. And foreign institutions cannot apply for this one, but you could have foreign components, like you could have a comparison with another country or something. And then all this stuff is pretty much boilerplate because USC has all this. So this says if you're an organization, you have to have this DUNS number. USC has it, don't worry about it. You have to have this system for award management. You have to have an ERA Commons account. So if you were going to be the PI on this, you'd have to have an ERA Commons account. But this is all done for you, and they're telling you that this is what you need to be a PI. A PI is basically any individual with the skills, knowledge, and resources necessary to do this. But in reality, for an R01, you basically have to have a faculty position in an academic institution, unless you're like the CEO of a nonprofit or something. That could work too. And it's usually a PhD or MD level thing. So number of applications, look, this is interesting. Each organization can submit more than one application, which is nice because some of them have a limited competition where it's like USC can only submit one. And then, suppose there are two different groups at USC with a good idea, then USC has to make them compete with each other to decide which one gets to submit. And that's just one more step you have to go through. So this is nice that, preventive medicine could submit one, and social work could submit one, some biological department could submit one. So that's nice. Let's see, requesting an application package. Don't worry about this because our grant people have it all under control. You have to follow the directions and the forms, of course. Letter of intent is not needed. Don't worry about that. Page limitations. This is saying basically you're going to follow the standard page limits. There's no exceptions. So we'll talk about that more later. There are different page limits for each form. These are a bunch of forms that you need, and the grants people will take care of this. You need the research strategy, you need sharing plan, you need human subjects. This is all really just standard stuff that you're going to see in every program announcement. So don't worry too much about this. Applications must be submitted electronically, obviously. Let's see, the criteria. This is usually pretty standard, but sometimes, this is saying what are the reviewers going to be asked to evaluate. Okay, so usually they're pretty standard. Sometimes they're different. So let's see, significance. Does the project address an important problem or critical barrier to progress in the field? This is all pretty basic. This is what reviewers are usually told to look at. But here, specific to this FOA, they're saying, did you justify why you're looking at this health disparity or vulnerable population? Do you have a clear and compelling conceptual model? So they're going to ask the reviewers these questions. So you want to have sections that address these questions. You might have a section in your grant that says, why this disparity population? Because they're looking for it. For applications with clinical trials, what's the rationale for the clinical trial? Investigators, usually they're asking, are the investigators good and qualified? Here, they're also looking for this specific FOA. They're looking for partnerships with relevant stakeholders and collaborators. Okay, so that it looks like they want you to do some community-based participatory research, or at least community-engaged research. They don't want it to be just ivory tower. So you need to emphasize that. For more instructions for clinical trials. Innovation, that's usually just, is it shifting current research or challenging paradigms, which you should always be doing. Approach, so they're looking at how rigorous your approach is the science good? And also for this FOA, they're going to ask the reviewers to look at your plans to reach, recruit, retain individuals from the target populations and see if that's good. Okay. And they give you very specific questions. So these are it's good to review these and make sure that you're addressing all these topics, because this is what the reviewers are looking for. Environment, that's the scientific environment. Review criteria. These are other things that the reviewers are going to look at, and this is pretty standard, that all NIH grants have to have a timeline, have to have protections for human subjects, have to include women, minorities, and individuals across the lifespan unless there's a reason not to. Can't like abuse vertebrate animals. have to take care of your biohazards in a good way, in a safe way. If it's a resubmission, they want to see how you address the previous comments. And they're giving you a bunch of other rules here. The budget, obviously research reviewers will consider whether the budget is fully justified. You have to justify your budget. Review and selection process is all pretty basic. They're gonna review it. You get a written critique. And they're telling you here that it might undergo a process where they look at the reviewer's initial scores and they only review the best ones. The other ones get triaged. So you have to be ready for that. Let's see, award administration. This is all, basic template stuff. They're gonna, you have to follow all these legal rules. Don't worry too much about that. And then another important part of that is the agency contact. So if you want to ask a question, you go down here and figure out who the people are. So scientific research contacts. This is, this person is a program officer at NIMHD. So if you're going to submit a grant to NIMHD and you have some questions, you're going to email her and hopefully she'll respond. Or if you're doing eye research, or you're doing aging research or alcoholism research, you want to email these people, the appropriate person, and ask your questions to them. Okay, and there's a lot of them because a lot of agencies are involved in this. So basically pick the one that's the closest to what you want to do and contact them. And don't contact them and say, how do I write a good grant? But you can contact them and say, I have this specific idea. I wrote down these 4 specific aims. Can you tell me if this is appropriate? And they'll probably say yes or no. Okay, so you can ask them questions like that. Or if there's something in the program announcement that you didn't understand and you want them to interpret, they'll usually just tell you, like, read the program announcement. They're not going to give you any secrets that they wouldn't give anyone else, but they can help you interpret. The peer review contact. So after you submit your application, if you want to know what's going on with the peer review, you can contact this person. Financial management, you probably won't have to deal with these people. They're just the money people. And there's no other information. So basically that's a program announcement, and we went through all this text. It's so much text, but it's good to just review it, but don't get bogged down in it. Okay, but it should tell you the information that you need to apply for the grant.